We're now going to continue our lecture on attachment by talking about the stages of attachment. So the first thing we see is what's called asocial. This is between about 0 to 6 weeks old. In this stage, babies don't show preference for any stimuli or people. A lot of times, this is called kind of the fourth trimester. The babies are born, but they really don't interact with the world yet. So they don't really show a preference for anything or anyone. The next stage is indiscriminate attachment. We see this until about 3 months old. Babies really show no preference for who is caring for him or her, but they enjoy human company. They don't cry when a stranger holds them. They accept food and care from anyone. So they prefer people, but they really don't show a preference for one person versus another. Then at around 3 or 4 months, we see attachment in the making. Baby starts to show a preference for familiar figures and suddenly doesn't like to be held by strangers anymore. The baby will now smile at familiar people more than unfamiliar people. Around 6 or 7 months, we see a clear-cut attachment. This is where we see an intensified dependence on the primary caregiver. Again, that's usually the mother, but it can be anyone. We also start to see a fear of strangers and separation anxiety from that primary attachment figure. And then at 10 months, we see multiple attachment. So most infants do have more than one caregiver and can attach to all of them, but there is still a primary one. It's not about who feeds them and changes their diapers. It's more about who plays with them and communicates with them. So for babies, their primary attachment figure is more likely to be the person who gives them the most attention and love, rather than the person who changes their diapers and feeds them, but those can be the same person. So a little bit of neuroscience. What happens in the mother's brain? Well, during pregnancy, the mother's brain is rewired to focus all her attention and energy on the baby. If you talk to any woman who's been pregnant, she'll talk to you about pregnancy brain, and there really is support for that. The brain is focused entirely on the baby and not on other things. Then during labor and what's called the golden hour, which is the first hour after birth, labor triggers oxytocin and dopamine. Both of those are feel-good hormones. And the first hour after birth is called the golden hour. So oxytocin increases your senses, and it allows a primal connection with the baby that involves scent and touch. If you talk to mothers, they'll say that right after birth they feel compelled to smell their babies and touch their babies. They want to engage with them on the sensory level. And it's because of this surge of oxytocin, and all the senses are heightened. Then during breastfeeding and skin-to-skin contact, oxytocin surges more. Oxytocin is called the love hormone, and there's a reason it's being released so much during labor, right after birth, and during breastfeeding. Even just touching a baby's skin-to-skin releases oxytocin in both the mother's brain and the baby's. And this oxytocin helps with breastfeeding. It helps the mom's body produce milk. So even if breastfeeding is impossible or the mother doesn't want to do it, that skin-to-skin contact is really important because it releases so much of that hormone. So what's happening in the father's brain? Well, about 3 weeks before the baby arrives, we see testosterone levels decrease, as testosterone is responsible for a lot of aggression. So in a way, we see the father's brain calm down. We also see an increase of vasopressin and prolactin. Okay, vasopressin facilitates bonding and decreases aggression even more. Prolactin is the lactation hormone. It's what women release to produce milk. It's not clear why it's released in males' brains, but it might be linked to a decreased sex drive. So even the father's brain is priming itself to take care of the baby and to essentially help mom. Then right after birth, we see a surge of estrogen in the father's brain. And this is a nurturing influence, so it makes the father more primed to care for the baby. It makes the father more maternal. And these changes in the father's brain last until about 6 weeks after birth. And most people agree that 6 weeks is the time it takes a mother to recover from birth. So this is not a coincidence. Skin-to-skin contact also releases oxytocin in men, so it's important for the father to have skin-to-skin with the baby as well to get that love hormone going. So next is the neuroscience of the child. What's happening in the baby's brain? Well, early positive attachment experiences, so good comfort and love, these set into motion a series of biochemical reactions that stimulate and promote the growth and development of the neural networks in the child's brain. Okay, so these early positive attachment experiences actually help baby's brain growth. Face-to-face interactions have the following effects. Well, they activate, hormones are released that activate the sympathetic nervous system, so we see an increase in oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine, all good hormones. Face-to-face contact increases oxygen consumption of the baby's body. It makes them process the oxygen better, which is good for all of baby's body and brain. We see an increase in energy metabolism. Again, that means baby is using the food it's getting better. It's better for baby's body and brain. And it increases their gene expression, so it's just good for them all over the place. And we see maturation of baby's heart rate. When babies are born, their heart rates aren't regular. They're pretty erratic, as is their breathing. But just having face-to-face interaction with a caregiver helps regulate baby's heartbeat. So does skin-to-skin contact, which we'll talk about more later. So what happens in an insecure attachment? Well, the lack of nurturing can actually change the neurochemical patterns in the brain, and it might lead the child later in life to react to oxytocin, which is the love hormone which we get in response to physical or emotional intimacy. It might make someone react to that with fear instead of pleasure. So when you hug someone or touch someone, you get a release of oxytocin in your brain. But children who had a poor attachment experience as a baby might react to that surge of oxytocin with fear or trepidation instead of pleasure. And when that happens, stress chemicals are released instead. So when they have a hug or emotional intimacy with someone, instead of getting this oxytocin, which makes them feel loved and safe, instead they get cortisol, which makes them feel afraid. So what can we do to create a secure attachment with babies? Well, a single primary caregiver is best. This is better than multiple irregular caregivers. We need synchronized routines with the caregiver and the baby for eating, sleeping, and stimulation. So play when the baby wants to play, let the baby sleep when he wants to sleep, feed when he wants to feed. Okay, synchronize your routines. Affection and touch. Babies need smiling, touching, affection, hugs, kisses. They need it. They need touch as much as they need food. And they need responsiveness, acting consistently to baby's distress signals with comfort, warmth, and competence. When a baby cries, it needs to be responded to. It needs to be given food or comfort or whatever it happens to need. And we need awareness and sensitivity. Be aware of the baby, be sensitive to his needs, help the baby overall. Responsiveness, awareness, and sensitivity are very important. And I always like to end with this because you hear it all the time. You cannot spoil a baby with affection. You'll often hear people, especially from older generations, say something like, don't pick up that baby so much, you're going to spoil him. This is not true. Their brains are not sophisticated enough. You cannot spoil a baby with affection. There is no such thing as too much affection for a baby. So what causes an insecure attachment? Well, poor quality of caregiving. So they're just not being fed very well, not being having their diaper changed, not being taken care of the way they should be. There could be a poor goodness of fit. We talked about that with temperament. If a parent can't mesh well with the child's temperament, it can interfere with attachment. Maternal deprivation. You've probably all heard of maternal depression. You've probably all heard of postpartum depression, and this is more common than you might think. And if the mother is depressed, it might make her miss or ignore the baby's distress. It might make them have a harder time bonding. And babies tend to match their mother's depressive symptoms, internalizing the model of a mother that is unresponsive to them. But when a mother's depression is treated, the child's depression improves as well. Very, very young babies are linked to their mothers. It's almost as though whatever mom feels, baby feels. And then their temperament matters. So temperament can determine which insecure attachment babies form with an unresponsive mother. Temperamentally fearful babies tend to form insecure resistant attachments or ambivalent, while more outgoing babies tend to form insecure avoidant attachments. So temperament can affect attachment. We are going to cover the effects of attachment in the next video.